Good morning, and how are you this morning? This is your host, Dr. Maul. Welcome back to Family 360. It's a privilege to see you again today, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this Bible study. It is truly a blessing and an encouragement to know that many of you have never seen you, don't know who you are, where you're from, but yet you're uh, encouraging me, and you're a blessing by just listening, tuning in, and allowing yourself to be taught the Word of God, to be more grounded in the Word of God, whether it's the Old or the New Testament. Don't be afraid of either. I'm here to help you through by the grace of God. Today, we want to continue our study on David. This is part A of David. This is, I believe, part 7 of part A. We have another whole new part B to go on the life of David regarding some of his personal struggles, his family, and so forth. So I believe today and tomorrow we should wrap up part A. We may go up to, I think this is section 7 of part A. And I thought, no, I may have skipped one segment or something. But I believe today and tomorrow we should just about wrap up part A, then go to the exciting part B as well. David is one of those charismatic leaders we see in the Word. And it is his life that has been the example to many modern leaders, as well as secular leaders throughout history. And we can learn a whole lot from David's style of leadership, whether you're in the military, in the police department, in the type of law enforcement, in the church, in your secular business. So let's look at how David changed Israel and solidified his power base. David came in at a time when Israel was broken, scattered, confused, stressed, overwhelmed. Israel didn't know whether or not they were going to survive because their king, Saul, had just been killed by the Philistines. And so now they are the law. So here comes David. And the northern kingdom did not want anything to do with David. Whereas the southern kingdom, 2 tribes, accepted David as king. We looked at Abner switching sides from the northern kingdom to the southern kingdom when he was rejected as king. And he came over to David. David's henchman, compatriot, twin brother, so to speak, Joab, got jealous and he killed Abner, just leaving him the uncontested military leader of David's army. David didn't say much of anything to Abner to Joab upon the death of Abner. And we will see how that hands-off policy of David is going to hurt him more so in his family relationships when we get to part B. So David had completely changed Israel and solidified his power. And here are some things that he did. Number 1, he exercised political power by establishing his capital at Jerusalem. We looked at this last week, where David went soon after he was anointed king. He went and invaded the Jebusites' city of Jerusalem, captured it, cleaned it out, made it his new capital of the unified Israelite nation. Next, David exercised military power by overcoming his enemies and gaining new territories. We see that in 2 Samuel chapter 8. Some of his major enemies included the Philistines and so forth. And David, um, shocked, um, I would say, he disappointed the Philistines because they thought with David being king, they had a um, someone in Israel that they could rely on and trust to be their surrogate. But David had different news, for the Philistines. So when we look at 2 Samuel chapter 8, the Bible tells us David conquers the surrounding nations. Verse 1, and after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them. And David took Metheg Ammah out of the hand of the Philistines. That's one. So we see he smote the Philistines. Then he smote Moab, the Moabites. Verse 2, and he smote Moab and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured he to put to death, and with 1 full line he keep alive. And so the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts. That's interesting to see how he chose who to kill, who would live, and who would die. Verse 3, David smote also Hadadezer, the son of Rehab, king of Zobah, as he went to recover his border at the river Euphrates. And David took from him 1,000 chariots and 700 horsemen and 20,000 footmen. And David hocked all the chariot horses, but reserved of them for 100 chariots. And verse 5, and when the Syrians of Damascus came to succor Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David slew of the Syrians 220,000 men. Man, this David was something else. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus. And the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. See, that was David's strength. That was David's support. Verse 7, and David took the shields of gold that were on the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. And from Beta and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took exceeding much brass. When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had smitten all the host of Hadadezer, then Toi sent Joram his son unto King David to salute him and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and smitten him, for Hadadezer had wars with Toi. And Joram brought with him vessels of silver and vessels of gold and vessels of brass, which also King David did dedicate unto the Lord, with the silver and gold that he had dedicated of all the nations which he subdued, of Syria and of Moab and of the children of Ammon and of the Philistines and of Amalek, the Amalekites, and of the spoil of Hadadezer, son of Rehab, king of Zobah. And David, verse 13, we are in 2 Samuel 8, verse 13. And David got him a name when he returned from smiting of the Syrians in the valley of Salt, being 18,000 men. And 14, and he put garrisons in Edom, the Edomites. Throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord preserved David. Second time we see this. Whenever we see God repeating a statement, it is significant. He says, and the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. Verse 15. And David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice. Oh yes. Unto all his people. 16. And Joab the son of Zeruiah was over the host, and Jehoshaphat Jehoshaphat, Joab, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahitub, was recorder, and Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the priest, and Sariah was the scribe. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief rulers. David kept some of it in the family. So we see how God was with David whithersoever he went. God kept his word, God kept his promise, and David exercised military power by overcoming all his enemies near and far. I mean, this David was one strategic military genius. War after war, war after war, God was with David, and David became mighty. Mighty. And right alongside David was his cohort in crime, Joab. David made extensive use of his personal army and gave Joab much authority as commander-in-chief. David was in no rivalry with Joab because he knew that for him to fulfill God's calling, he needed Joab. Joab was not the best of characters, neither was David, so they were like two peas in a pod. They needed each other. David also exercised spiritual power by bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, or not even back, but to Jerusalem, and by appointing the priests Abiathar and Zadok as co-priests in the capital. You see, so David is striking a balance here between the secular and the religious. David wanted to make sure that God was honored, God was magnified, God was praised. And on the secular side, David had his military campaign. But on the secular side, David had his commanders as well, with these two priests, Abiathar and Zadok, as co-priests within the capital for the entire nation of Israel. So under David now, we see a very, very strong, powerful, united nation. And his son Solomon later on will come and expand on this, what would you call it, empire that David had established during his days. David also exercised economic power by collecting tributes from subject peoples, those that he defeated, those that he conquered. They had to pay tribute to David, and the spoils of war, the tributes were now part of the treasury of Israel. So Israel is now a mighty nation, powerful, rich, with a mighty God. No enemy could come against Israel, because during the reign of David, thus far, he subdued all of them. He subdued all of them, that used to taunt and harass the Israelites near and far. David was mighty. He was powerful. He was rich. What else? He was a God-fearing man. David also exercised, additional economic power or labor power by enlisting subjects from those he had defeated into his army. And he used them to do his building projects. Those people who were captured, those were the times of enslavement. Those were the times where you had indentured servants. People who were captured were brought into, and keep in mind that in all these territories, David had established what he called garrisons. David had established garrisons. I know I circled it here. Yeah, verse 6 says, Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts. And the Lord preserved. So everywhere David went, everywhere David was victorious, he did not just, defeat the army and leave. He established his own rule, his own order. He established his own garrisons. Verse 14 also tells us that David, and he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And again the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. So wherever David went, he established garrisons. And of course, garrisons are military units that are put in a foreign land to keep law and order, just like the Romans did later on, throughout Palestine. And the Bible tells us in verse 15, and David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and what? Justice upon all his people. So we begin to see now David is putting in place an administration. Saul didn't have any of this. And that's what I said, when you look at administrations today, the world over, ever since then, a lot of them follow after the examples that David set. And later on, if you get into the life of David, you will see he had ministerial cabinets, men in his cabinets who were responsible for certain duties. I think on a monthly basis, you will see that as well. So David was very keen. David was very smart. I believe the Holy Spirit was so involved with David that he taught David these things. So, as I said, in 2 Samuel 8:15-17, we see that David established a cabinet of leaders that included a commander of the army, a recorder, a secretary, a leader of subject peoples, and 2 priests. Yep, that's what it says. And verse 15-17, and David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. Verse 16, and Joab the son of Zeruiah was over the host, over the army. And Jehoshaphat the son of Ahitub was the recorder. And Zadok the son of Ahitub and Ahimelech the son of Abiathar were the priest. And Seraiah was the scribe. Verse 18, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over both the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief rulers. So David had a structure, what we call an organizational chart. I just had to do one of those this week for the state, for my agency. Every organization, every tribe, every nation, every church. Some churches, the pastor is everything. And when the pastor moves on or dead, oh, Lord have mercy, all hell breaks loose. Some leaders don't believe in succession. And that's sad. So we see here that David had an entire cabinet of various ministers, and he was not afraid to use his sons. He says his sons were chief rulers. Maybe he put his sons over different territories, like regions or governors, of the areas that he conquered. So David did a masterful job, a wonderful job in linking the old order with the new order, the old order of King Saul with the new order. The territory was distinctively his. He didn't just go with the old stuff that was handed down to him from King Saul. No, but David came in with ideas. David came in with a plan. David came in with an agenda for, number one, to unite the entire Israelites, the north and the south, and also to put leaders in addition to the elders. There was a structure. There was an organization for the entire nation of Israel. And I believe there were judges, and everybody was there, in their place, fulfilling the role that was designated for them. So at this point, we see that this territory, the united Israel, now takes on the distinctive appearance, character of King David, the distinctive desires and plans and goals of David. And he took control of territories that were held by the Philistines, and he put garrisons in all of these, governors, and I believe some of his sons. So not only did he take over the Philistines, who were Israel's #1 enemy, but he also took over the Moabites, the Ammonites, he took over the Arameans, the Edomites, the Amalekites, and others. Oh, what a time of warfare. And through it all, David was loved, adored, and respected. Through it all, God's hand was with David. War after war, battle after battle, David was victorious. So 2 Samuel 8:15 says, so David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and equity to all the people. You see why the people would fall in love with him? All the people. The structure that he put in place made sure that the people's needs were met, that their complaints were addressed. The one thing that would complete his takeover of Israel was what? One thing that was missing was to build a temple to God. That was and David had it in his heart. He asked the prophet Nathan, if he should. So David consulted God, he consulted the prophet Nathan, and Nathan gave his consent at first. See, be careful who you're listening to. Be careful who you listen to, and a lot of us preachers, because we think we hear directly from God. Be careful. One scripture said, test the spirits, test the prophets, all those who want to prophesy over you, test them. Whatever they prophesy, give it time. Whenever they lay their hands on you and prophesy over your life, give it time. Don't just get up and run and do what they tell you to do. Give it time. Use common sense. Be patient. If through somebody, God told you to do something, then you need to give it time to see if it's really from God. So we see here that Nathan at first gave his consent. He was excited with David's plan to build a temple, but God corrected what's his name? Nathan. 2 Samuel 7, I believe, verses 5-9. God said, well, let me read from verse 1. And it came to pass, 2 Samuel 7, and it came to pass when the king sat in his house, and the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies. Who gave him rest? The Lord. Anything we achieve, we accomplish, is through God. Verse 2, and the king said unto Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in an house of cedar, but the ark of God dwelleth within curtains. And Nathan said to the king, go, do all that is in thine heart, for the Lord is with thee. Nathan's initial response to David was to give a stamp of approval for his desire to build the ark unto God, to build a temple unto God. But verse 4 tells us, and it came to pass that night that the word of the Lord came unto Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus saith the Lord, shalt thou build me an house for me to dwell in? Whereas I have not dwelt in any house, since the time that I brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt, even to this day, but have walked in a tent and in a tabernacle. In all the places wherein I have walked with all the children of Israel. Is God walking with you? Many times we often think we are walking alone, we are walking by ourselves. Look at what God is saying here. With the children of Israel, during prosperous times, during famine, during times of rebellion and chaos, and during times of grief, God was still walking with Israel. God said, in all the places, verse 7, in all the places wherein I have walked with all, not just one or two, with even the bad guys, with all the children of Israel, spake I a word with any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people Israel, saying, why build ye not me an house of cedar? Now therefore, so shalt thou say unto my servant David, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took thee from the sheepcote. He was a shepherd. From following the sheep to be ruler over my people, over Israel. God lifted up David. Sometimes we cannot understand the lifting up of certain leaders in positions, but God doesn't lift it up. Even for those who are evil leaders, God's permissive will allow them to rise. God said, and I, verse 9, and I was with thee whithersoever thou went, and have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight, and have made thee a great name, like unto the name of the great men that are in the earth. Moreover, verse 10, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them. God said he's going to plant Israel. Some of you who don't believe in Israel's future, I got news for you. God said, I will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. That's a future tense, by the way. God is going to plant them, but that now. They're in Israel, and they're catching hell right now. The present day Israel is not peaceful, and it's only going to experience peace when Christ returns. God said, I will plant them, and they may dwell, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more, neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. This is future. This is prophetic. God has given David this promise. And as since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused thee to rest from all thine enemies. Also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house. And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, death comes to us all. I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. This is Solomon. He shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men, and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him. God's mercy towards Solomon. Some of us wonder whether or not Solomon is saved. Solomon is going to be in the kingdom. Yes, he will. But verse 15, but my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. 16, and thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. All these things, if you continue to read, you see the excitement of David, God's promise. What a commitment from God. What a commitment. David's throne will be established forever. When Jesus Christ is the son of David, you know. So we see here God's eternal promise to David. So we look at, we see God's promise to David. So now we come to the fact that God corrected Nathan the prophet and told him to tell David, no, David cannot build a house of God because David basically had too much blood on his hands. God established a kingdom. God established an empire, everlasting one for David. The Davidic dynasty was in effect. Oh yeah. Things were going extremely well for David, and he was smart enough to keep it that way. He was. He worked to make sure there were no surprise threats to his territory. This man was an excellent administrator. Verse 2 Samuel 9:1. This is where one of those threats he thought was coming from. David asked, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Not for Saul's sake, but for whom? For Jonathan's sake. David wanted to honor his oath to Jonathan, but it was also likely that he wanted to make sure that there were no other relatives of Saul who could either lay claim to the crown or start a rebellion against him. So David's plan right now to honor a relative of Saul was twofold. He wanted to make sure that he was keeping his oath to his best friend Jonathan, but David also wanted to make sure that there was no family member of Saul who could rise up to challenge him. Remember that David was smart and cunning. Remember that David is no fool. David is no idiot. David is no pushover. David is a smart, intelligent leader. And he's looking at threats from everywhere. What about you, sir? What about you, ma'am? Do you look for threats everywhere? Are you smart enough? Are you cunning enough to be aware of those that are around you, those who could threaten your home, your family, you yourself? Be like David, be alert, be aware, because the Bible tells us our enemy is after us. Satan wants to deliver us. David learned that Jonathan's son, who had a disability, was living in Lodebar. Lodebar. I preached some sermons on this city some time ago. Lodebar. You do not want to be living in Lodebar. It's not a nice place. Arid, dry, desert, isolated. This is where Jonathan's son or grandson had, Jonathan's son, Saul's grandson, had fled to. He had a disability in his legs. Handicapped. And he was living in Lodebar with somebody to take care of him. And David sent for Mephibosheth. His name is Mephibosheth, one of those crazy names in the Bible. I love it because, I don't know, maybe because of my accent, it helps me to say it quite well, Mephibosheth. So David sent for Mephibosheth, who paid homage to David. Just imagine you're Mephibosheth. You're sitting out there in Lodebar. You see soldiers coming for you. What's going through your mind? He knew David is king. I guarantee you the thoughts that went through Mephibosheth's mind as he saw David's soldiers and servants coming towards him were not nice, were not pleasant. Because he knew the culture, he knew the history. He knew that anyone that posed a threat to the new king was a goner, was dead. And he was a threat to David. In his mind, he was a threat to David. And so David sent for him. I believe David wanted to feel this man out. So David extended hospitality and kindness to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son. And most likely David was motivated by a sense of obligation to the oath between Jonathan and himself. 1 Samuel 18, 1-4. 1 Samuel 20, 14-17. David was a man of his word. He wanted to look after any descendant of Jonathan. So I am also sure that David was sincere in making a place for Mephibosheth and his family in Jerusalem. That was his commitment to Jonathan. You see, but at the same time, Mephibosheth was a survivor of Saul's empire. He was a threat to the throne. How convenient it was for David to have a surviving contender to the throne so close, so near, and so beholden to him. David could keep an eye on Mephibosheth. If Mephibosheth was up to no good, David would have known. So David kept him close. David kept him in Jerusalem. Mephibosheth had a young son. The man was handicapped, but he still had sex. His young son's name, Micah. That's a whole new sermon on how we deal with the disabled. Because there are some of us who believe that people who are disabled do not have sex, they don't have any feelings. We think that, they have lost their mind, their mental faculties. Yeah, that may be the case, but it doesn't mean they've lost their physical faculties. That's why you see those who have been disabled have been sterilized down through the ages. Today, some of them have been given certain types of birth control to make sure that they do not conceive, to reproduce that illness. So the house of Saul was declining. It was going down. It was on a downward spiral, but it was not dead. And David wanted to make sure it did not become a threat to him. Later on, we will see where Mephibosheth will have the opportunity. And, some people question his loyalty, but I believe he was still faithful to David when his servant tried to set him up. So David brought Mephibosheth, a contender for the throne, in the mind of David, closer to Jerusalem, so David could keep an eye on him. So let's wrap up this part A. What did I do? I did something. Let's look at David here and his relationship. Peas in a pod. David and Joab. Oh Lord. If two men were made for each other, it was David and Joab. If two men were inseparable, if two men knew each other's secrets, it was David and Joab. Cohorts in crime. You see, because the destiny of one was wrapped up in the destiny of the other. The destiny of Joab, the destiny of David was wrapped up. They were wrapped up in each other. David and his commander-in-chief, Joab, tie them together because David could not have ascended. David could not have been ruler. David could not have done some of the things he did without Joab. Joab could not have risen to his position, the lofty position of commander-in-chief of such an empire. He was second in line to the throne, if you look at it that way. Of course, David's family was in line to the throne, but if Joab wanted to turn against David, it would have been something else. But they were twins. Peas in a pod, as I'd say. None of David's military exploit could have happened with such success without Joab's military genius. And keep in mind that Joab was David's nephew. So was Asahel, the one that got killed. And there were other family members who served David, who was in David's army. David was on the run from Saul. He gathered a group of roughnecks who raided the countryside with him, and Joab was one of those. In the early group of men who came to search out David and to support David in his battles against Saul. David was no angel. Can I say that to you, please? David was no angel, but yet God was with him. We see some men and women today, they're no angels. But God is still providing and leading and saving. He was no angel and was not above killing his opponents. We will see that. And I'm sure, David had done that throughout his military campaigns. And some of his opponents deserved to be killed. He had no qualms. He was not squeamish. He was a man of war. So David's life was marked by violence. Do you know people like that? Their lives are marked by violence in our inner cities, in our suburban communities. There are violent people. And David seemed to enjoy the drama, surrounding his exploits, surrounding his conquests. He enjoyed going to war. He loved going to war. He knew that God would not allow him to be killed because God had told him he was going to use him. So with confidence, with assurance, David went into all his battles, confidently. And I believe there were instances when God gave him strategy to defeat an enemy. David knew that the power of God was with him, that the planning of God was with him. It is not conceivable. It is not conceivable. It is not possible that David surrounded himself only with gentle, nice men. The Bible tells us some of them were ruffians. You know, they were robbers and thieves. David surrounded himself, and at times David himself became a ruffian, a robber, and a thief. He will took what was not given to him. David surrounded, he was like his men, rough, rugged. But keep in mind, the anointing of God was upon him, the calling of God was upon him. David, his gang members reflected David's own personality, David's own character. The people that surrounded him, whether it was Joab, Abiathar the priest, Ahitub, some of these other men that he appointed to leadership position in his cabinet. Zariah, as I said, Zadok the priest, they were not nice. They had to fight. They had to defend. And I'm sure from time to time they had to fight each other. But listen, they are like David. David was too smart to hang out with dummies. David knew he had to go someplace. David knew that God had a calling and appointing upon his life, and he had to bring this nation together. That's why he was specifically and personally chosen by God. David did not surround himself with dummies. David did not surround himself with idiots. David surrounded himself with strong men, competitive men who competed against each other, men who had done tremendous exploit similar to some of the things that David himself had accomplished. Men who had rough personalities. Only David, I don't believe anybody else could have gotten the loyalty of these men. It was likely that Joab, joined David's band of outlaws early, and he rose in the ranks. So Joab himself had to do some tremendous exploits. Have you read about David's mighty men? Just imagine Joab being weaker than any of them. So Joab had, I believe, had to do his own mighty deeds. And so together, Joab and David, they plotted, they schemed, they maimed, they murdered, and they won battles. Oh, I would hate to be an opponent to David during his days. I would hate to be David's enemy or Joab's enemy during those days, because I would have to take both of them on and I would not have made it. I would have to take one of them on and I would not have made it. Oh my, and just imagine knowing that God was with, what was it like to be an enemy of David and hear all the exploits, hear all the nations that David conquered, and you're next? What are you going to do? Just surrender. One of the kings, verse 2 Samuel 8 verse 9, King Toy of Hamath says, when he heard that David had smitten all the hosts of Hadad, the king sent his son, an ambassador to David with gifts. See, that's a smart king. You don't want David and Joab as your enemy. This King Toy of Hamath sent his son Joram unto David without to salute him and to bless him. You better not curse the man. To salute him and to bless him, because he had smitten all his enemies. Brought vessels of silver, vessels of gold, and vessels of brass, which David dedicated as a smart king. Anything you want, David. Anything to appease you, David. So we see that David and Joab, they plotted, they schemed. David had his cabinet of ruffians, cabinet of valiant, smart, intellectual warriors. So they schemed, they killed, they murdered, they won battles, all with the blessing of God Almighty. So David was just another warrior without Job. They needed each other. And with Job, David was, what is that? David was formidable. David was invincible. David became mighty. Oh yeah. And together they were a force to be reckoned with. For together they were a force with which others had to deal with, and they all went down defeated at David's feet. Their relationship required complete trust and confidence in one another. That's why David we'll see later on where David will confide in Joab about his interaction with his liaison with Bathsheba and setting up Bathsheba's husband Uriah to get killed. Job and David were part and parcel of one another. Yet there was something going on with the two of them that bubbled just below the surface. There was that tension. There was still some tension between the two of them. And this tension, if you read 2 Samuel chapter 10, there was some tension here with the Ammonites. You know, David learned that the ruler of the Ammonites had died, and he sent his condolences to a corps of ambassadors. But the Ammonites, remember that David was clever and cunning, and they were suspicious. And Hanun, the new ruler of the Ammonites, embarrassed David's men by cutting their beards and their garments and sending them away. Oh, that's an embarrassment. And when David found out about this, he had no choice but to deal severely with the Ammonites. King Hanun realized the error too late. King Hanun realized the error of his ways and began mobilizing troops to defend himself against the wrath, the anger of David. And he hired the Arameans and Zobah and formed a coalition with the ruler of Mecca and the men of Tob. Boy, he paid out a ton of money to get mercenaries and armies to come fight against David. And guess what? David simply ordered Joab to handle the situation, which he did brilliantly. Not only was Joab an able warrior, he also inspired and encouraged the troops. 2 Samuel 10 verse 12. It says here, this is Joab. Well, let's go back to verse 9. When Joab saw that the front of the battle was against him before and behind, he chose of all the choice men of Israel and put them in array against the Syrians. Verse 10, and the rest of the people he delivered into the hand of Abishai his brother, that he might put them in array against the children of Ammon. 11, and he said, if the Syrians be too strong for me, then thou shalt help me. But if the children of Ammon be too strong for thee, then I will come and help thee. Be of good courage, and let us play the men for our people, and for the cities of our God, and the Lord do that which seemeth good. And Joab drew nigh, and the people that were with him, unto the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. And when the children of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fled, then fled they also before Abishai. Joab, where's David? David is not here. Joab is motivating his army in this battle. He's motivating his people in this battle. A vast horde, vast army had come against him. David joined the fight and was victorious, but the credit for the victory went to Joab and the strategy that he discussed, with his brother. Where am I at? So 2 Samuel chapter 10, 17 to 19. That's where I was, 17 to. So we see this strategy. Verse 17, and when it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and passed over Jordan and came to Helam, and the Syrians set themselves in array against David and fought with him. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew the men of 700 chariots of the Syrians and 40,000 horsemen. Wow. And smote Shobach, the captain of their host, who died there. Verse 19. And when all the kings that were servants to Hadadezer saw that they were smitten before Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. So the Syrians feared to help the children of Ammon anymore. That was a bad deal. That was a bad deal for the Syrians and the Ammonites. So after we see Joab was sent to take on the battle, I believe word got back to David that there were too vast a host. So David gathered the other remaining part of the army, went out and joined the battle. David and Joab were mirror images of each other. Both were smart, both were courageous, both were valiant men. They were fearless and they were ruthless when needed. And at the same time, they were religious. Despite their badness, they were religious. You'll see some bad, evil people out here, but they will tell you they believe in God. They were complicit in war crimes they committed. They knew each other's secrets. Oh, best friends, best buddies. They were complicit. They knew each other's secret. Whatever one was up to, the other one was knowledgeable about it. They trusted each other in certain ways. They needed each other, Joab and David, to reach their goals and be successful. And as we will see in part B that we're going to begin to study, Joab would play a major role in David's family life. Joab would step up to the plate and become even more pivotal in David's family life. David would use him when it was convenient and expedient to do so. Joab was loyal. He was loyal to David, and it will be interesting to see how their relationship developed as we begin to look at part D. So my question to you was, what kind of leader was David? How do you feel about the violence that David dished out in the name of God to achieve God's purpose? And this is that new. Down through the ages, the centuries, we've heard about the religious crusades, all in the name of God. Even Hitler used God as an excuse to do. Men often use God to accomplish their own purposes and ends. What are David's leadership strengths and weaknesses so far? What do you consider? I don't see a weakness in David so far. David's weakness is Job, and Job's weakness is David. But yet it's also their strength. Do you think David was sincere in his lamentation when Saul died? What about Jonathan and Abner? I believe he was. I believe when you read the Psalms, you see a very sincere young man who trusted God completely. He was very, very vulnerable. David, emotionally, you want to see how a man acts, behaves during times of grief, during times of loss, during times of stress. David is it. You see every emotion in the psychiatry books, in the psychology books, in the therapy books, marriage and family therapy, but you see all these emotions when it comes to David. David is a compendium. He's a compilation of everything that's emotional, psychiatric, because sometimes when you read about David and the travail he went through, you wonder, how did he manage to make it from day to day with all this stress? And I believe it was the hand of God that kept him. How do you rate David's administrative skills? Very well. Excellent administrator. Look at how he set up his kingdom. He put in place cabinets. And later on, if you delve more into his leadership and his empire, you'll see how skillful an administrator he was. Did David operate out of self-interest, or did he work for the common good? David worked for God, himself, and for the good of the nation of Israel. In this day and age, the question is, how does an ambitious individual live an ethical life? It's hard. In this day and age, it was hard for David because David had to do some things even God was not pleased with. That's why God did not allow him to build the tabernacle, because his hands were bloody with war. Even so, today, there are many of us who have questionable ethical lives within the church as leaders, within our families, because of some of the things we've had to do. How ambitious are you? How do you keep your ambition in control? How do you keep your desire to control and manipulate in control? How do you manage all of that? How do you make it from day to day? How do you make money to not only care for yourself, but care for your family? And what advice would you offer David about his relationship with Joab? Some of us would be scared to death about a relationship with so strong a man as Joab. How would you deal with conflicts? If you were David, how do you see him deal with conflicts? And why did God love David so much? Huh? Well, we're gonna pick up from here tomorrow. We That's it for part A. I thought we was gonna go into another session, but that's it for part A. And tomorrow, we, God willing, we'll begin part B to look at the family, the personal life of David, and we will continue to see the role that Joab continues to play in David's life. This is Dr. Maul with Family360, and I encourage you to become more familiar with the programs and services that we offer. We are here to be a help to you as a leader, to ministry. We are